Fall is the perfect season for sunflowers, and we always see them in a range of oranges and reds and yellows. But today I want to remind you not to put those sunflowers away so quickly, because they do come in a rainbow assortment of colors and can be used almost all year round. Here's a look at some of the new Scrappy tail products that I'm using for my card today. I have this Wild Sunflowers stamp set. There are several different amazing sentiments that are part of this stamp set, as well as 4 different styles of sunflowers. They also have a coordinating die. I did not happen to have mine at this time, but I do have it for a future card. This is called the Layering Sunflower. It is a gorgeous layering die set. There are 3 different sizes of sunflowers in this die set, and you can mix and match the pieces. You can add as few or as many layers and dimension to this as possible. I am going to be doing some ink blending with some ink from Paper Tray Ink. I'm starting with Scarlet Jewel. You'll notice that there's a big hole in that sunflower. It doesn't have to be that way. I just didn't remove the die because I knew I was going to cover that up. So if you don't want that big hole, you certainly can just cut out your die, and then it will be a solid piece like the one at the bottom. I'm blending it out a little bit with a color called Autumn Rose, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the Lovely Lady. Now it's very dark and intense, as you can see right here, but I am going to spritz this with water, and that is going to have 2 purposes. The first purpose is going to be that it will help the colors just kind of flow together. It will add a little bit of a softness. It will actually lighten up these sunflowers, so they are not going to be as dark as they appear right now. And then it's also going to make the paper pliable for me to be able to shape. Now I like to shape my flowers. You certainly could just glue them together and add each of the layers just on top of each other with a little bit of glue, but I am a dimension girl, and that's something that I always try to achieve when I'm working with flowers, especially with these dies. For this is the finishing layer, so this is what all of those pieces are going to go on top of. You see that I have a large piece and a medium-sized piece. I'm adding that Autumn Rose to the center. You're really not going to see it that much, but I wanted to make sure that if I curled the petals too much, that there was a little bit of the variation in color underneath. And then I blended with that Lovely Lady. Again, I spritzed it with water. This is a Pollen from Spellbinders. So I've added it to a coffee filter. This is one of the centers for the sunflowers, as I mentioned. It does cut out those circles. So I went ahead and added some wet glue to it. I'm mixing it in the pollen, and then I'll set it aside to dry. I don't get a complete coverage, which is just fine, because when I put it in the center of the flower, then I'm going to add a little bit more glue. I'll sprinkle some of this pollen onto the circle, and it will cover up any white space that's showing. This is a tool-in-one. This is the Susan Tyranny's tool set for flowers. This is kind of a flat-footed stylus that allows me to add a little bit of texture and veins to the flower, as well as allowing it to curl. You can see that I let it dry a little bit. I didn't want it to be completely wet, but I wanted it to dry back just a little bit so that I was able to work with that tool easily. I added 2 layers of the sunflower to the larger flat layer after I added that dimension with that stylus. And then for the bottom piece, I still want that. I don't want it to lay flat. I want to add a little bit of movement to that. So I'm just using some tweezers, and I'm curling those petals as far as they will go. And this is really something that adds, as I mentioned, dimension and will bring everything to life. Once I have the flower shaped the way that I want to, I like to use a round ball stylus, and just press the center of the flower, and that's going to give it even more dimension. And you can see that that pollen, when I share the finished card, is really going to add a deep black to the center of that flower. In person, it has kind of a velvety texture to it, which I think is really fun. I'm going to color up my leaves. I'm just going to show one of them. On this one I left white space, but I didn't necessarily leave white space on all of them. I started with a color called New Leaf, and then I blended out with green parakeet, and now I'm using prairie grass to add some splatters. We're going to start creating our background. I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch panel here, and I am going to ink up my sunflower with that autumn rose ink, and then for the parakeet, for the leaves, I'm going to add the green parakeet. I spritz it with water because that's going to allow me to have kind of a watercolor look. So if you want a crisp image, you can skip the water, but for me, I wanted to have that little bit of flowing of the ink, and so right before I stamp it onto this card panel, I do spritz it with my distress sprayer. I'm going to add these around. I'm going to add 3 of this sunflower, and then I will add another sunflower that has a little bit of a different shape. And again, I'm getting that movement by adding that water. This is going to create a beautiful background for my sunflowers to sit on. I did want to talk a little bit about the Scrappy Tales release. I am going to link Sabrina's video in the description box below. I am a fall card lover, but there are so many amazing, innovative Halloween products that she released, and I think that it is worth your time to take a look at that video just to see the amazing cards that she was able to create using the products from the fall release. As I mentioned, I am a flower girl. That's something that I am just naturally drawn to. I don't send out a whole lot of Halloween cards, so even though the products were amazing for me, it's just not a card that I use that often, so I thought that I would always use this year round. And I decided, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, to just go over how you can change the colors up and still use it outside of the fall season. I did spritz this panel with water to get a little bit more movement onto the card panel, and I did use my heat tool to dry it. I'm adding that lovely lady, which is that lighter pink, around the sunflowers in the white spaces so that that white space isn't so stark. And then I'm going to add some splatters using the Scarlet Jewel. I'll add a little bit of the green leaf, but the green leaf doesn't show up as well as maybe that's the parakeet. It doesn't show up as well as I anticipated it would, so instead I'm going to bring in the prairie grass, which is more of like a brown green tone, as you can see right there, like an olivey color, and I like the coverage that I get with that better. So to assemble my card, I do have an A2 top folding card base. I trimmed my panel down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm going to add, actually that's not a card base, that's a card panel. I'm going to add my watercolored background to that. It's going to give me a 1/4 inch border all the way around, and then I have this satin ribbon in polka dot. I thought that green color was a perfect match for my leaves and for my paper. I have this arch piece of vellum, so this is another Spellbinders die that I've used, and I've just cut it out of vellum, and I'm going to add a little bit of tape to the left and the right side, which will be hidden by the sunflowers, so it will allow that vellum to show through slightly, and it will also camouflage. The flowers are going to camouflage that tape runner. I went with a knot instead of a bow on my card, and I'm going to trim that down as well. Those tails are just a little bit too long. So I have one large flower, and you can see how beautiful that pollen is in the center of those flowers. I created 2 smaller flowers to flank that one. I like to add things in odd numbers, so I believe I'll end up with like 5 leaves and 3 flowers. And once I get these glued down, I'll bring in those additional leaves for the card. This is going to be absolutely beautiful. It would be stunning if you did it in kind of those orange reds that sunflowers come in. You could do the same background, use the same technique. Just changing up your colors is going to change the season. We are still technically in summer, so the pink is a perfect color combination with that green, I thought. But if you're more into working on the true fall season of cards, then, you know, using those fall colors would be beautiful as well. There is going to be an Instagram hop coming up. I believe it will be tomorrow. And in that Instagram hop, I did change the colors up. I used the exact same products, added a few different things to my card, but basically I did create a similar style card using that same technique with the watercolored stamping. And you're going to see how different that card looks by adding some deeper, richer tones that are more, as I mentioned, in that fall color scheme. I couldn't decide where I wanted to add my leaves. Eventually I decided that I was going to add my leaves up to in the upper right hand side of this composition. I'm going to bring in one more here, and I left that bottom right area so that I could add my sentiment. For my sentiment, as I mentioned, I didn't have the dies. I am going to actually change this up. I don't like the look of my sentiment, so I'm going to apologize, but I did want to get this video up and share it with you. But I'm using one of the sentiments from the sunflower stamp set, and it says, "You add sunshine to my life," and I think that's a beautiful sentiment. I don't have any of my dies to be able to cut a banner for this, and so I ended up cutting a square, and I'm really not very good at getting a square straight with my paper trimmer, so that is going to eventually be changed up. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Thanks so much for watching.